We will never turn our back on a single Scot.
We've got to wrestle with those challenges.
This is the same nonsense we have heard time and time again.
This is our country. Let's fix it together.
And welcome to the latest Planet Holyrood. I'm Paul Hutcheon, political editor of the Daily Record, and I'm joined this week by Hannah Rodger, who's the chief reporter at the Sunday Mail, and Douglas Dickey of the Scottish Daily Express. So there's a few things that I think we should talk about. The first thing is the First Minister's NHS recovery speech on Monday. I was there. Before, I know, lucky me. I mean, I think it started at 9:30 and we were out by 12:30, so it's 3 hours of my life that I'll never get back. We'll talk about the content, but I have to say that I listened to what he said very carefully, but the big issue for me in the whole thing was about trust, because I understand that John Swinney comes in, he's the new First Minister, he wants to have his plan, but Nicola Sturgeon also had an NHS plan, which has been binned. Mm-hmm. The SNP won the 2021 Holyrood election with some pretty bold, eye-catching NHS policies. Most of them have been binned as well. So given they've delivered next to nothing on the health service over the last few years, I think it's a legitimate question to say, how can we trust anything that John Swinney has to say on this subject?
Are you asking me?
I am indeed. Over to you now.
Yeah, I would agree, to be honest. I think that a lot of the promises, not just that the SNP have made, now we're seeing Labour in the same situation, but a lot of promises that are being made are just either watered down once an election is over or abandoned altogether. With the NHS, you know, we've had an NHS recovery plan in place, since 2021.
That's dead.
Yeah. And now we've got this relaunched sort of plan that it does make it very hard to trust, like the things that have been announced will actually go ahead. Even if they did go ahead, will they make a difference? You know, there's been some sort of commentary that the policies that John Swinney announced in that 3-hour session were kind of rehashed, essentially, just repeating old promises, made repackaged to look like new things. So I think, you know, there's that, and then there's also the context of the NHS, the social care, what am I trying to say?
National Care Service.
Yeah, the fact that that's been abandoned and the amount of money that's been wasted on that.
Which was a key manifesto flagship commitment, the creation of a national care service.
Yeah, and it also probably would have freed up a lot of the NHS as well, but that's now not happening. So I do think that it's not just the SNP, but for our purposes, given the SNP are in charge in Scotland, I think that, you know, it has been really disappointing. And I'm kind of very sceptical as to how much of it is going to go ahead.
I think, Paul, if you're moaning about spending 3 hours at John Swinney's speech, you should think yourself lucky you're not in an A&E queue, because you might be waiting a hell of a lot longer than that.
Mm.
Apparently it's better than it is in Wales, though.
Well, that's
some comfort if you're, you know, in a trolley or, you know, in a corridor for 5 hours. It's worse than Cardiff.
This has been the SNP's mantra on a lot of things. Oh, it's slightly better than things down south. It's slightly better than things in Labour-run Wales. And it should be, because we know that public spending per head is higher in Scotland than it is in England and Wales. So it should be better. There's no excuse for it not to be a bit better. But, you know, as you say, it's kind of scant consolation to those who are going through the system. I mean, this is something I think all political parties have become really adept at, and it's kind of pretending that they've not been in charge for, you know, the last decade, or in the SNP's case, you know, 17, 18 years, as if to say, right, now we're going to sort it. Mm-hmm. Well, why is it taking until now? Obviously, COVID threw a spanner in the works. No one's going to, kind of deny that. But even since COVID, they've had, how many health secretaries were on? What, our fourth health secretary since COVID? I mean, that's not great either. You know, there's no.
And the current one is on a shaky peg.
Well, I mean, this is the thing. The fact that John Swinney's had to step in, he says that he's taken over. Well, what is Neil Gray doing?
Yeah, you would expect the NHS recovery plan to be announced in Parliament by the Health Secretary. The fact that it's John Swinney doing it is just further proof, because he told me in an interview a couple of weeks ago that he's effectively taking the lead now on it. So, I mean,
Well,
what is Neil Gray's role?
Either John Swinney is a control freak or Neil Gray is completely discredited, or both. But, you know, Neil Gray has spent far too much time going to football matches and not enough time actually trying to fix his brief.
I think that he's probably viewed by John Swinney and his team as gaff-prone, accident-prone, attracting headlines for all...
Accident-prone?
Well,
Like Hamza
well, I mean...
falling over.
Yes, well...
Sorry, that's...
maybe
that's very-
metaphorical accidents.
Sorry, Hamza, I'm absolutely not laughing at that infamous video.
Yeah, but there is speculation that he will be moved sideways during any reshuffle. And at the press huddle afterwards, I did ask the First Minister, I said, look, can you guarantee that Neil Gray will still be Health Secretary by the autumn? And he gave me a one-word answer, yes, and then moved on. There was no sort of compliments for the Health Secretary, no talking him up. It was just a one-word answer, and then he just moved on to the next question. So, I mean, is he going to be here by the autumn? I wouldn't put a tenor on it.
Do you not think it's interesting, though, Neil Gray, because he was being spoken about as a potential future leader of the SNP when he was in Westminster, and it was all, you know, oh, he is coming to Holyrood, he's going to leave Westminster, come to Holyrood, because that's his plan, and he's going to do really well up in Holyrood, and he will take over the party at some point.
I have heard that. I haven't heard it in a while,
No, but-
particularly since he took over as Health Secretary.
No, but that's what I mean. Like, he's just totally fallen flat on his face in this job. You know, he's not, it's really damaged him.
I think it's pretty obvious that the only reason he's still in his job is that Mary McCallan's on maternity leave. There's a lack of talent, a lack of depth, you know, on the SNP benches. Who else is going to take it over? You know, there's no... He may well still be Health Secretary in the autumn, but, you know, September the 2nd, I'm not so sure. It's just, he's clearly, metaphorically, a dead man walking in that role, and that doesn't help, you know, the health service either.
But then again, Hamza wasn't a particularly distinguished Health Secretary.
No, but he actually was there and he was present, and you could see that he was trying to do stuff.
That's a pretty low bar. He was there and he was present.
Well, he wasn't going to bloody football matches and trying to buy Oasis tickets and making jokes about it and then saying he didn't.
Well, you know, true. I mean, I'll maybe check the logs to see if he was going to football matches. I mean, he may have been, but he was maybe shrewd enough not just to restrict it to his team of choice. If you look at the content of the speech, I mean, there was the usual stuff about AI and digital revolutions and promises of apps that were promised about 6 years ago. But I suppose the main thing is that they want fewer people going to hospital and A&E and more people treated where possible in their own homes and in communities. But again, there's a huge sense of deja vu with this. They've been saying this for years, and it's not rocket science. It's kind of obvious.
Oh, yeah.
It's like they're sort of unveiling this big new thing, but everyone knows this in every bit of the health service across the United Kingdom.
Yeah, but also I think the more politicians make these points about, oh, you know, we need to reduce A&E attendance. If you feel that you have to go to A&E, you are going to go. However, there are going to be a number of people who think, oh, I'm not going to waste a doctor's time. Or, you know, I know how overcrowded the A&E is. If they actually genuinely need it, I'm thinking maybe older people who have a stronger sense of kind of social responsibility, I think, who might say, oh, I'm just not going to go, and they don't get treatment and something really bad happens. You know, I think you have to be really careful with this narrative about deterring people from actually accessing health services.
Self-medication.
Well, exactly. You know, turning to things like that, or, you know, not getting treatment for something that's quite minor and then it develops into something worse and it ends up costing the NHS or councils or whoever a lot more money. So I just think it's, yeah.
There's also, you know, the NHS is free at the point of use, but it's not free. You know, it's funded by the taxpayer. Taxpayers have a right to access that service. It never sits well with me when politicians come out and say it'd be much better if you didn't use this service. And I think there's a real argument to be made that it's up to them to ensure that the service can cope. Health has been a real thorn in the SNP's side now for years. It's also an issue down south. Ultimately, at some point, we may need to have that conversation again about how the NHS is funded.
We're always having that
NHS
conversation. The conversation's always ongoing.
Yeah, but no one in power ever really takes it seriously. And I'm not saying, I don't want to see the NHS privatised. I don't know what I don't actually know what the answer is. But then, I don't need to be a plumber to know my washing machine's on the blink. It's up to the government. It's up to those in power to come up with the solutions, and they're failing to do that. And they failed to do it for years now, and people are paying the price.
But I think as well, what we are seeing is more people turning to private providers when they didn't used to or they didn't need to. You only need to walk along any sort of high street and you see these private clinics everywhere now. And I think up in Sucky Hall Street near our offices, there's like a sort of private, calls itself a hospital. I don't really know how it can be an actual hospital, but, so I think clearly there is a gap in the market, and that's where all these private providers are moving in, opening actual clinics and bricks and mortar like shops and facilities. So the demand is increasing for that. So, are they just expecting that the problems with the NHS will resolve themselves because people who've got the money will just start paying for private services?
Yeah, we already have a health service, two-tier health service, based on the ability to pay. If you can afford to go private, then you will or can, while the rest of us who can't have to make do with shockingly high waiting lists and, having to call a GP practice about 60 times in a half-hour slot to try and... I mean, how is that?
It's horrible.
I mean, 2024, and that's how you get access to a GP. It's ludicrous.
2025.
2025, sorry.
Even worse.
Yeah.
But, the thing is as well is we do already... The NHS isn't free right across the board. We already pay for dental treatment, for example. It really annoys me when people say, access to healthcare is free here. Your mouth still counts as your health, and you need to pay with that. But Hannah's right about saying that, this could, telling people to stay away can put more pressure on the NHS eventually. And we're seeing, the real world scenario playing out. I, until this year, was eligible for a flu jab. I was told this year I'm no longer eligible for a flu jab. Now, touch wood, I've not caught flu, but you see the figures in hospitals, and that decision to save money by not offering the flu jab to everyone is coming back to bite, because now hospitals are full of patients with flu. So it has real world consequences.
Slightly different because basically this year it's been so bad. I think partly because they didn't estimate the strain of flu correctly, so we've had a different strain of flu than the one that they thought would be the most prevalent. So even if you had got your flu jab, the flu version that everyone is getting and that's making them sick, the jab that you would have got wouldn't have prevented you from getting that strain of flu.
But would it have maybe offset it, maybe not as caught it as bad? But you can already pay for flu jags. So if someone wanted to go kind of private for that, but ultimately less people get the flu jab, and obviously there was a unique situation this year perhaps, but you don't need to be a genius to work out less people protected, more people are going to end up in hospital.
I do feel that John Swinney's team see the NHS as their key weakness. It's their Achilles heel, the one thing that they could get absolutely hammered on in the election. So he is trying in some way to neutralise it as best as he can. He's taking the lead. He's effectively demoted or sidelined Neil Gray. But there's just not any meat there. And I don't think people have any confidence that this plan is going to be delivered. I think that's his problem. So if Monday for me was a bit of a swizz, I think Tuesday was a better day for him on the budget. I mean, we already knew it was going to pass because of the Labour abstention, but Swinney was pretty clear in his New Year's speech that he wanted political parties, not just the Greens, to actively vote for the budget And we got that confirmation yesterday, firstly with the Greens and then with the Lib Dems. Seems like they were bought off pretty cheaply. I think if you add up all of the concessions that they managed to wring out the government, it came to about 16 million. So the
really?
Greens, the Greens got a partial policy on £2 bus fares in one part of Scotland that's not yet been named. And also the rollout of free school meals in some areas for secondary 1 to 3.
Yeah.
And then the Lib Dems got, I think, £2.6 million for drug and neonatal services to help babies addicted to drugs. Who could possibly be against that? Good day for Swinney, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think what it shows is that maybe people, politics has been so divisive over the past few years and very confrontational. And I think there's a bit of fatigue setting in. We've got an election next year. Everyone knows things are going to ramp up again. And I just detect a feeling among some that they just kind of want to get on with the job at hand for a change. It's nice to hear for a change. At the same time, I kind of feel like the Lib Dems and the Greens could have held out for quite a bit more, but they probably knew that the other one was going to do it anyway. So
Labour killed it.
Yeah, pretty much. Labour kind of killed it off, and knowing, the Greens know that the Lib Dems are going to support it. So, and the Lib Dems know that the Greens are going to support it. It wasn't a great surprise. I think it was probably always going to get through. There's no appetite for an early election. I know that was never really, everyone was kind of talking up. I don't think it was ever a realistic proposition, but it just seems a bit. Yeah, people they just kind of want to move on and get ready. Everyone's positioning themselves now for the Holyrood election next year. The Tories can turn around and say, well, we're the only party that stood up to the SNP, this rotten SNP budget. The Lib Dems can say, well, we were able to wring concessions out of, the SNP, and the Greens can continue to be the SNP's poodles, roll over and have their tummy tickled.
What can Labour say?
Well, that is the problem. I mean, everywhere you look for Labour, there are issues just building up, and it seems like they can't make any, they can't seem to get any decision right. I thought Rachel Reeves was a bit better today, the Heathrow stuff.
Oh.
I think they're a bit stronger on that, but the problems just keep piling up, and they just look weak now. They just do nothing. They've managed to get no concessions, but at the same time, they've basically rolled over and let the SNP budget pass.
Yeah, I would say that Labour need to get their abstention in quicker. I think dragging it out until a day after John Swinney's speech or whenever it was bad timing. They should have done it like a week or two after the budget, try and kill that narrative, because John Swinney was just for weeks and weeks demanding Labour clarify. Just that's not a good political strategy. But
I think when you said what can Labour say, the only thing they can say is we're slightly angry about this, but we're not really going to do anything, or we can't do anything. I mean, unfortunately, that has been Scottish Labour's problem, like you were saying, but they're not being strong enough, I don't think, against the SNP when they don't agree with certain things, but they also can't, or they're not making much progress in terms of challenging their own party in Westminster, so they can stand up and say, well, we don't agree with this policy, like the WASPy policy, for example, or the winter fuel allowance, but so what? It's not going to help them, because they're not really able to do that sort of discussion and negotiating with Westminster Labour to get them to change their mind. All they can say is, oh, we're not very happy about this.
It's kind of got echoes. It's almost like the political equivalent of Father Ted and Dougal, outside the cinema. Careful now, down with this sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
But, we don't want to go too far. But it's just, they just look really weak right now.
yeah, they're in a difficult position. They've got their conference coming up. I'd imagine they're going to wheel out some policies, try to get themselves on the front foot, although they will inevitably be worried that if the policies are good, then the SNP will try and steal them in some capacity. But they do need some better news coming out from the UK government.
Yeah, that's. I think the UK government holds the key. And like Keir Starmer said that Scotland, the only way to Downing Street was through Scotland, I think the only way to Butte House for a NAS is via Downing Street. You know, I think that they really need to throw them a bone in some capacity, otherwise they're going to be completely destroyed at the elections. And I never thought that was going to happen, but I didn't think that a UK Labour government would be so catastrophically bad as it has been.
And I think the way this budget has gone for Swinney, you'll probably be confident that the pre-election budget, the one that he's going to announce in December, will pass as well, because that's when the big money kicks in for the two-child cap, the £150 million or whatever it is. I think it's inconceivable that final tax and spending plan is not going to pass. I think you can see his experience coming to the fore here. He used to be a finance secretary. He did deals with the Conservatives to get budgets through in Alex Salmond's first term. He knows the system better than anyone. Whether that's going to be enough to get him over the line next year, I don't know, but he's given him a fighting chance.
And you know, a few months ago, you'd have said they didn't have a fighting chance in that election, or at least they were going to be in a very difficult position. I don't think they're quite there yet. I think as we progress towards May 2026, the focus is going to turn on the SNPs. You know, right now all the focus is on Westminster and what Labour are doing there. Once the focus turns on the SNP's management of Scotland, it's not going to look great for them. We've also got I think that's 10 SNP MSPs now standing down. You know, that's not the sign of a party that's going into an election with a lot of confidence. You know, people are already kind of jumping ship a bit. We've seen it with the Tories before the last election. A lot of big hitters announcing, oh, you know what, I think I've done my time at Westminster.
I want to spend more time with my family.
We're seeing that now. We're seeing that now with the SNP. So they're in a much better place than they were 6 months ago. John Swinney has steadied the ship. But as I've said before, it's not as if voters are flocking back to the SNP. They're going from Labour to Reform, actually, you know, and the Tories to Reform. They're not going back to the SNP. So,
Yeah, the pro-UK vote is splintering.
Yeah, and that will obviously help the SNP, but whether it's enough to get them a pro-independence majority again, you know, I don't know.
So let's, on the subject of splintering, Alba have got a leadership contest.
Do they?
I believe. Ash Regan, MSP, versus Kenny McCaskill, the former Justice Secretary and SNP MP. I mean, I love covering leadership contests.
I know.
I mean, I've covered so many. I think I've covered about 400 in Scottish Labour in about a decade. My favourite one ever was Ruth Davidson versus Murdo Fraser back in 2011, where Murdo wanted to abolish the Scottish Tories. That was an absolute beezer. This one...
So, where does Reagan McCaskill rank?
Well, I mean, it's in its early days, but it's shaping up to be a good one. Hannah, you had a story at the weekend. Do you want to talk us through that?
Yeah, but we'll caveat it by saying the story had absolutely nothing to do with the leadership contest. It just
Of course
happened
not. Of course
I
not.
got the story while there was a leadership contest going on.
Complete coincidence. Good point.
Yeah. So my story on Sunday in the Sunday Mail was about some concerns that Kenny McCaskill had made or raised at the time. It was back in 2023. Basically, he believed that Alex Salmond was using Alba party resources and funds to benefit himself and his Edinburgh Fringe show, as opposed to being of benefit to the party. And he also refers to Alba members as the Salmond fan club, which I thought, I don't know if the members are going to be too chuffed to learn that the guy who's running to lead the same party is describing them as that. I just thought it was an interesting story because it was a sort of, glimpse behind the curtain, because Kenny McCaskill is very much seen as one of Salmond's closest allies. He was one of the first people to leave the SNP, prominent.
Didn't he speak at Salmond's funeral?
Yeah, of course he did. And he was there when Alex Salmond's body was brought back from Macedonia, and the previous week, Alex Salmond's widow came out publicly backing Kenny McCaskill for the leadership of Alba. So, I just thought it was quite an interesting tale. But the other element of it that I found very interesting was just the nature of the claims that he believed that he was, potentially using political party resources and funds to the benefit of his own sort of commercial enterprise, the Edinburgh Fringe Show. Because I remember
Operation Branch Form 2 coming up, maybe?
I remember when Alex Salmond, well, I personally remember, but I know of when Alex Salmond was in the SNP, him and Ian Blackford had a massive falling out, and there was some suggestion that Blackford had been unhappy about Salmond's spending on sort of lavish hotels and, transport and things for
And for Moira, his wife, as well.
Yeah. So I just thought that's quite interesting that there's similar things emerging again. Obviously, Alex Salmond is not here with us any
Curious
longer,
that the
so we
same
can't ask him,
allegations
but-
would follow him across the parties, almost like there's a pattern of
Well, yeah, but also,
behaviour.
the fact that he is being, he was being kind of accused of doing things similar to what branch form is looking at, which obviously involves different people. So, yeah, I just thought it was really fascinating from all of those different angles, but definitely I do think it will be an interesting leadership contest.
And who's your money on?
I think probably Kenny McCaskill. I think Ash Regan is going a little bit, I think Kenny McCaskill is, I'm not saying Ash Regan's heart is not in the right place, but I think Kenny McCaskill's much more of that sort of old school independence, sort of at all costs type person. And I think Ash Regan, did she not like tweet or write a letter to Elon Musk recently? I just think she's kind of flirting with the right to a degree that we don't really see a lot of crossover with independence kind of supporters and the kind of far right.
Of course, she did stand in the SNP leadership contest against Humza Yousaf and Kate Forbes. Famously, she had that idea of the independence thermometer.
Yeah.
I wonder what the reading is on the thermometer just now. I think it's quite low.
I would say ice cold. But
I don't think it is.
Yeah, I think it is.
I really don't. If you look at like polls,
Well, polls aren't really moving, but ultimately,
yeah, but it's still like roughly half and half.
electoral,
So
in
I would
terms
say
of
that's
elections,
like a maybe 15 degrees. It's not ice cold.
well, it's ice cold in the sense of, can it be delivered in the next 10 years? I'm not saying sport is ice cold, but, as a political issue, it is effectively off the table. I mean, the SNP would never admit that, they want to push it because that's why probably 70-80% of people vote for the SNP, vote for them because they support independence. And that is their first and foremost. And I mean, I assume 100% of people who vote for Alba, although you could fit that support in a telephone box. And I think that's where we need to see the kind of context to this election. I mean, this leadership contest. Alba have never won an election.
Never come
had
close.
never come close to getting anyone elected. They're polling at about 1%. The only reason they've got MD in is because people defected to them when Salmon was here. I mean, Kenny McCaskill probably will. I agree with Hannah. He probably will be the next leader. But I don't even think there'll be a party lead come the 2026 Holyrood election.
Also, they styled
they're-
themselves as this, new pro-independence party. We're going to be different to the SNP. It's turning the chapter from the scandal hit Scottish National Party. And they're fighting like ferrets in a sack, like the SNP have been doing over the last few years as well. It's just a schism.
And they're, and they're so different from the SNP that their two leadership candidates are two former SNP government ministers. So,
I was going to say, is it all over for Alba? But did it ever really start?
I don't think it's all over. I think it did start.
Alba is
Well,
rising.
we've got another couple of months in them because, story-wise, I think it'll be pretty spicy. I think you're right, though, Doug. Parties like this, I think it's always best to go for the change option. But how can you have change when one of the candidates is a guy who's been in Scottish politics for decades, and Ash Regan as well? She's been in the Scottish Parliament for, was it 10 years, something like that?
Yeah.
where's the new blood in that political party?
I don't buy that though. I don't think we need to constantly have new blood as leadership. I think there's a reason why.
Or talented people.
Well, there are some people there who have got political nous and who do know what they're doing. But, you know, I get it. They're an easy target. It's easy to mock them. So I understand why you're saying
They all
those
seem to be
things, but-
fighting over the memory of Alex Salmond as well. I mean,
yeah,
that's-
100%.
That's, which is...
I mean, like, you know, I found it amusing that Kenny McCaskill referred to his own membership as the fan club, basically, but that's what it was. All these people joined because they didn't agree with what had happened to Alex Salmond and how he had been treated, and, you know, believed that he also could deliver independence because he did manage to get that vote previously. So they thought that that could be done again. So it was a real belief in one person.
I mean, Alex Salmond, Alba was Alex Salmond.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, that's the
you know,
reason why
without
they got so
that-
much
yeah,
coverage.
exactly. If Kenny McCaskill had started a different political party, no one would have given a toss.
No.
And it's not a political party, it's a revenge mission. It was
Yeah.
basically set up to get revenge for Alex Salmond on his perceived enemies. That's what it was about. Now that he has passed away, I don't think Alba's got a future.
No.
I don't actually think they had a future even when he was alive, because although Alex Salmond had a lot of name recognition, his reputation was in the gutter. And I don't think Alba is a viable entity. But if they prove me wrong, I will eat humble pie.
On this show,
Metaphorical humble pie on this show, yeah. Okay, thanks very much again to Hannah and to Dougie for joining me on Planet Holyrood. You can listen to this episode on Spotify or Apple Music, or watch it on the Daily Record YouTube channel. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram and TikTok for the latest news and best bits of the podcast.
We will never turn our back on a single sport.
We've got to wrestle with those challenges.
This is the same nonsense we have heard time and time again.
This is our country. Let's fix it together.